This badge looks fake. You really expect me to believe you're FBI?
I already told you, you can radio it in. My credentials are real.
You think staying calm makes you innocent? Why aren't you nervous?
Because I know I haven't broken any laws. And I know you're making a mistake.
We'll see about that.
Officer, you're detaining a federal agent without cause. Think carefully about your...
It was supposed to be a normal day on Highway 48. Bright sky, light traffic, and a patrol car parked just off the shoulder. But what happened next would end up spreading across the internet, shocking everyone who saw it. The officer sitting in that patrol car thought he was about to pull over an ordinary driver. What he didn't know was that the man behind the wheel wasn't just anyone. He was a federal agent, someone who had seen things that most cops couldn't even imagine. By the time this traffic stop ended, that officer would wish he had never turned on his lights. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd really love to know. And if you enjoy stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. All right, let's get into it. The man driving the black SUV was Agent Reed, an FBI investigator known for keeping calm even in the worst situations. He had just left a meeting in the city and was heading home after a long day. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't breaking any laws. But as he passed that parked patrol car, the police cruiser suddenly pulled out behind him, lights flashing red and blue. Reed sighed. "Here we go," he muttered, pulling over to the side of the road. In the patrol car, Officer Dalton tightened his jaw as he stepped out. He had a reputation in the department for being tough. Some called it confidence. Others called it arrogance. Either way, Dalton liked feeling in control. To him, every driver he stopped was a chance to remind people who had the power. He walked slowly up to the driver's window, one hand resting on his holster, the other tapping on the tinted glass. "License and registration," he said, not even greeting the driver. Reed rolled the window down halfway and calmly handed over his ID. "Sure, officer. May I ask what the problem is?" Dalton narrowed his eyes at the man's calm tone. "You were going a little too fast back there," he said. Reed looked at him, puzzled. "The limit is 65. I was doing 60. Dalton smirked. "You calling me a liar?" Reed didn't answer. He knew that kind of question was a trap. Instead, he waited quietly as the officer walked back to his car to run the plates. Dalton didn't like that. He didn't like how calm this driver was acting. Most people looked nervous when pulled over, but not this man. That alone made Dalton suspicious. He typed the license plate into his computer. A small alert flashed across the screen. Government vehicle. Federal clearance required. Dalton frowned. "Federal clearance?" he muttered. "Yeah, right." He slammed the keyboard, thinking it must be a system glitch. He grabbed his flashlight and stormed back toward the SUV. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered sharply. Reed blinked. "Officer, is there a reason for that?" Dalton leaned closer. "I said step out." With a slow sigh, Reed opened the door and got out, keeping his hands visible. He'd dealt with officers like this before, men who let the badge go to their head. Dalton circled him, looking for any excuse to find something wrong. "You think you can just drive around with government plates and act like you're special," he said. Reed stayed silent. He knew words would only make things worse. Dalton snapped. "What, you too good to talk to me now?" That's when Reed finally spoke. "Officer, I'm going to reach for my wallet. It has my credentials." Slowly. Dalton laughed under his breath. "Sure, let's see what fake badge you've got in there." Reed opened the wallet and held it out. Inside was his FBI identification card, clearly marked with his name, photo, and the federal seal. Dalton's grin vanished. For a few seconds, his face froze. He looked from the badge to Reed's calm expression, unsure what to say. That's fake," Dalton stammered. "It's gotta be fake." Reed kept his voice even. "You can radio it in if you want. Ask for confirmation." Dalton's pride was already hurting. He didn't want to look weak in front of the man he had just yelled at. He was too deep in to back down now. "Turn around," he ordered. "Hands on the car." Reed stared at him in disbelief. "You're making a mistake, officer." "Now," Dalton barked, gripping his handcuffs. As Reed turned around, he noticed several cars slowing down to watch. People were taking out their phones, recording. Dalton didn't seem to care. He was caught in his own power trip. "Sir," Reed said calmly, "you're detaining a federal agent without cause. I advise you to." Dalton shoved him slightly against the car. "You don't advise me on anything," he snapped. "You follow orders." By now, another patrol unit had arrived, drawn by the flashing lights. A younger officer stepped out, clearly confused. "Everything all right, Dalton?" Dalton pointed at Reed. "Guy's got a fake badge, says he's FBI." The younger officer looked at the ID. His eyes widened. Dalton, this looks real." Dalton glared. "Don't tell me what looks real. I know a fake when I see one." But Reed's voice remained calm. "You can call Washington Field Office. They'll confirm." The younger officer hesitated, then stepped aside to make the call. Dalton folded his arms, still fuming. Minutes passed. Then the young officer came back, pale. They confirmed it. "He's legit. This man's an FBI agent." Dalton's face drained of color. He looked at Reed, realizing what he had just done. The cameras, the people watching, it was all hitting him at once. Reed turned slowly to face him, his calm now replaced with quiet disappointment. "I gave you every chance to do this the right way," he said softly. Dalton opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He could already see the headlines forming in his mind. Dalton sat in his cruiser, staring blankly at the steering wheel. His hands were shaking. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The other officer was standing outside, still on the radio, reporting the situation to headquarters. People who had filmed the stop were already posting it online. Within minutes, the story would spread. Reed stood by his SUV, arms crossed, calm but stern. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He just waited. He'd seen this kind of thing before, officers who let arrogance blind them to reason. But even he was surprised by how far Dalton had gone. The younger officer approached nervously. "Agent Reed, the field office wants to talk to you directly," he said, handing over the radio. Reed nodded and took it. After confirming his identity, he gave a brief rundown of the encounter, keeping his voice level. He didn't insult Dalton, didn't exaggerate, just the facts. That was enough. When the call ended, Reed walked back to Dalton's window. Dalton still hadn't moved. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "Officer," Reed said quietly, "you might want to step out. My supervisor is sending someone down." Dalton swallowed hard. "Sir, I didn't know who you were." "That's the problem," Reed said. "It shouldn't matter who I am." Those words hit Dalton like a punch to the chest. Minutes later, 2 unmarked black vehicles pulled up. Out stepped 2 men in suits, FBI Internal Affairs agents. The younger officer stepped back immediately, realizing things had gotten serious. One of the agents approached Reed and nodded respectfully. "Agent Reed, we've been briefed." "You okay?" "I'm fine," Reed said. "But this officer here decided to detain me without cause. Thought my credentials were fake." The agent turned to Dalton. "Is that true?" Dalton tried to steady his voice. "I believed he was impersonating a federal agent. I had to act." The agent's face stayed expressionless. "You had the chance to verify before detaining him. Why didn't you?" Dalton didn't answer. His throat was dry. He glanced around. People were still parked on the side of the road, watching, filming. The situation was spiraling. "Officer," the agent said firmly, "place your weapon on the hood of your car." Dalton hesitated but obeyed. His hands trembled as he removed his gun and set it down. The second FBI agent began writing notes. "You're being placed on administrative review pending investigation," he said. "Until then, your badge and firearm will be held." Dalton's face turned red. "You can't just—" Reed cut in gently. "They can, and they should." For a long moment, there was silence except for the sound of cars passing by. Dalton looked at Reed, really looked at him for the first time. Not as a suspect, not as a target, but as a man he had wronged. "I made a mistake," Dalton muttered. Reed nodded slowly, then learned from it. The agents escorted Dalton to their vehicle. As they drove off, the younger officer stayed behind, visibly shaken. "I'm sorry about all this, sir," he said to Reed. "He's not usually like that." Reed gave a small nod. "You did the right thing by calling it in. That matters." The younger cop managed a weak smile. "Guess this one's going to be all over the news, huh?" Reed looked at the highway stretching ahead. "Yeah, and maybe it should be." By that evening, the video had already gone viral. News outlets picked it up, social media was flooded with comments, and the words "arrogant cop pulls over FBI agent" were trending everywhere. At the police department, things were tense. The chief had seen the video and was furious. What was he thinking? The chief said to his deputy, "You can't treat people like that, especially not a federal officer." Dalton sat alone in an office, staring at the blank wall. His badge was gone, his gun taken, and his phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages he didn't want to read. Some officers tried to text him support, but he knew deep down that what he did wasn't defendable. A call came in from the chief. Dalton answered slowly. "Dalton," the chief said, voice cold. "Internal Affairs and the FBI want a full written statement by tomorrow morning. You're suspended until further notice." "Yes, sir," Dalton said quietly. "And, Dalton," the chief added after a pause, "you embarrassed this department. Whatever happens next, you brought it on yourself." The line went dead. Meanwhile, Agent Reed was in his apartment, scrolling through the same video that was now everywhere. He didn't like being the center of attention. He'd spent his career trying to stay out of the spotlight. But this incident wasn't about him. It was about something bigger. The comments online were divided. Some people were angry, demanding the officer be fired immediately. Others tried to defend him, saying maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Reed read through them quietly, not reacting. His phone buzzed. It was a message from his supervisor. "Good job keeping calm. Media's calling for a statement, but we're keeping this internal for now." Reed replied simply, "Understood." He closed his phone and leaned back. For a moment, he thought about Dalton, not the arrogant officer, but the man behind the uniform. He'd seen that kind of attitude before. Insecurity hiding behind authority. Sometimes, the badge didn't give power. It exposed who you really were. The next morning, Reed was called into a meeting at the FBI field office. When he arrived, a few senior agents were already there, along with a representative from the police department. The air was thick with tension. One of the senior agents began. "Agent Reed, we appreciate your professionalism during the stop. You could have escalated things, but you didn't." "Thank you, sir," Reed said. The police representative cleared his throat. "The department deeply regrets what happened. Officer Dalton has been suspended, and an internal review is underway. We want to make this right." Reed nodded. "I'm not looking for revenge. I just hope he learns something from it." "We all do," the representative said. A few days later, Dalton was called in for an internal interview. He sat across from the same two agents who had shown up on the scene. This time, there were no cameras, no flashing lights, just a quiet room and a long table. "Officer Dalton," one of them said, "why did you assume Agent Reed's badge was fake?" Dalton rubbed his face. "I don't know. Maybe I just didn't like how calm he was. Most people get nervous when I stop them. He didn't." So you saw confidence as disrespect. Dalton sighed. I guess I did. The agent leaned forward. You let ego take control of your duty. That's dangerous. For you and everyone else. Dalton didn't argue. He just nodded, eyes down. When the interview ended, he walked out to the parking lot and sat in his car for a long time. The same patrol car he once felt proud to drive now felt like a reminder of how far he had fallen. He turned the key but didn't start the engine. His reflection in the rearview mirror looked different, tired, broken, smaller. For the first time in years, he felt what real humility was. 3 weeks later, the world had moved on, but not Dalton. The department had placed him on unpaid leave pending review. His friends at the station had stopped calling. Every time he stepped outside, it felt like eyes were on him. People whispered, some laughed. His arrogance was gone now, replaced with something heavier. Shame. He tried to distract himself with long drives, but every time he saw flashing lights in his rearview mirror, his chest tightened. He knew how it felt now to be on the other end of that power, and he didn't like it one bit. That morning, Dalton was sitting in a small diner, sipping cold coffee when his phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. He hesitated but answered. Officer Dalton? A voice said. This is him, Dalton replied quietly. This is Agent Reed. Dalton froze. He hadn't expected to ever hear that voice again. Listen, Reed continued, I'm not calling about the incident. I'm calling because something's happening right now in your area. We need your help. My help? Dalton said, surprised. Why me? Because you're close, and you know the roads better than anyone, Reed said. There's a suspect on the run. A man wanted for assault and armed robbery. He just hijacked a van headed toward Route 9. We've got a chopper in the air, but ground units are spread thin. Can you assist? Dalton hesitated. He was suspended, technically not supposed to engage. But deep down, the officer in him, what little pride was left, still wanted to do something right. Yeah, he said finally. Send me the location. Dalton sped down the road in his personal car, radio on, eyes sharp. A white van was up ahead, weaving dangerously through traffic. He could hear distant sirens closing in, but they were still miles away. As he got closer, the van suddenly swerved off the highway and crashed into a small store parking lot. Dalton pulled over a few yards back, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out carefully. Before he could get closer, the driver's door burst open. A man jumped out, holding a gun. Dalton ducked behind his car, dropped the weapon. He shouted out of instinct. The suspect turned toward him, gun aimed. Dalton's pulse spiked. He didn't have his service weapon anymore. He was defenseless. Then another car screeched to a stop nearby, a black SUV. Agent Reed stepped out, gun drawn, moving low and fast. Freeze, he commanded. The suspect fired once. The bullet missed both of them and hit a tire instead. Reed took cover and fired back, hitting the suspect in the leg. The man dropped his weapon, falling to the ground. Reed ran forward and kicked the gun aside, handcuffing him quickly. Dalton stood frozen for a moment before hurrying to help. When the suspect was secured, Reed turned to Dalton. You okay? Dalton nodded, still catching his breath. Yeah, I didn't think you'd call me for backup. Reed gave a small smile. I didn't call you for backup. I called because I knew you'd show up anyway. Dalton frowned. You knew? Yeah, Reed said. You needed a chance to do the right thing again. So I gave it to you. For the first time in weeks, Dalton didn't feel small. He felt useful. After the arrest, the local police and FBI handled the scene. When the dust settled, Reed and Dalton stood beside their vehicles, away from the crowd. Reed looked at him calmly. You handled yourself well, especially without a weapon. Dalton shrugged. Guess I remembered what it felt like to be on the wrong side of things. didn't want to make the same mistake again. Reed nodded. That's good. Growth matters more than ego. Dalton glanced down. You know, I've replayed that day 1,000 times in my head. Every time I think about how I talked to you, it makes me sick. Reed said nothing, letting the silence speak for a moment. Then he said softly, the badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It just gives you a duty, to protect, not to prove. Dalton nodded slowly. Yeah, I learned that the hard way. Sometimes that's the only way lessons stick, Reed said. What matters is what you do next. Dalton took a deep breath. What do I do next, Agent? Reed smiled faintly. Start over. Be the officer people can actually trust. Weeks later, Dalton was reinstated, but not in his old role. The department reassigned him to community outreach, a position most officers saw as a downgrade. But Dalton didn't complain. Instead, he showed up early, stayed late, and started visiting local schools to talk to kids about respect, fairness, and second chances. One afternoon, as he finished speaking at a middle school assembly, a teacher handed him an envelope. Someone dropped this off for you, she said. He opened it. Inside was a single card. No name, no address, just a short message written in clean handwriting. Greater than pride breaks men. Humility rebuilds them. Keep doing better. R. Dalton smiled. He didn't need to guess who it was from. Months later, the two men met again, this time at a law enforcement conference. Reed was one of the speakers, presenting a session on accountability in uniform. When he finished, Dalton walked up to him quietly. Didn't think I'd see you here, Reed said with a grin. Dalton chuckled. Didn't think I'd be invited. You've come a long way, Reed said. I've heard about the outreach work you're doing. Keep that up. Dalton nodded. You know, I never thanked you. For what? Reed asked. For not ruining me when you could have, Dalton said. You had every right to make an example out of me. Instead, you gave me a second chance. Reed looked him in the eye. You earned it. I just gave you the opportunity. They shook hands, a gesture that carried more weight than words. Outside the conference hall, Dalton stood for a moment, watching the sunset reflect off the parked cars. He thought about how different things could have been if that one traffic stop had gone worse. He used to think being an officer meant showing power. Now he knew it meant showing restraint. He used to think respect was demanded. Now he understood it's earned. The wind picked up as he walked toward his car, badge clipped to his belt again, not as a symbol of authority, but of responsibility. From a distance, Reed watched him leave, a faint smile on his face. Justice hadn't come from punishment. It had come from change. And so, what started as a reckless act of arrogance ended as a lesson in humility, accountability, and redemption. One man's mistake became the moment that reminded an entire department what wearing the badge truly means. Because sometimes, the people we think are our enemies are the ones sent to teach us who we should have been all along. If you stayed with this story till the end, thank you. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you love stories that show real growth, real justice, and real redemption, make sure you subscribe, because more powerful stories are coming your way.